The Modi government has disowned two BJP leaders for their comments on Prophet Muhammad. This after a full-blown diplomatic crisis has erupted as a result of those remarks. I'm Barkha Dutt here with the Mojo story. We are today talking about Nupur Sharma. Nupur Sharma was a national spokesperson of the BJP, in fact, contested on the BJP ticket against Arvind Kejriwal. And another colleague of hers called Naveen Jindal, who was associated with the Delhi BJP. Both have now been described by diplomats across the Gulf nations as fringe elements. India has disowned their remarks, one made in particular to a television channel, remarks that were seen to be Islamophobic and insulting of Prophet Muhammad. Hate mongers clearly have consequences for India's image abroad. But the opposition is now targeting the government, saying, why should India be apologizing for what the BJP's own members do? Remember, many of these countries are asking now for a public apology. The government so far has only clarified that these are vested interests and not representative of anyone in government. Is this the government now drawing a red line around the rhetoric of hate? Or is this a short term set of responses that have been necessitated by needing to stabilize relations with West Asia? Let's introduce our panel. Sandeep Ghosh, commentator and columnist, is with us. We're also joined by veteran retired diplomat, Ambassador Fabian. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Also joining us is Islamic scholar Fazlur Rahman. Welcome to the program, Mr. Rahman. And finally, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, strategic affairs analyst, is with us as well. Now, I have to wonder, what is an Indian diplomat thinking today? Did a diplomat train for this moment when she or he would actually have to rationalize and defend and manage a crisis that has erupted, not because of differences over strategic affairs, for example, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but because of what a party spokesperson has said on a television channel? Ambassador Fabian, let me take this to you. It's not an enviable time to be a diplomat posted to one of the West Asian countries. Is this the job of a diplomat?
Well, a diplomat has to handle all types of situations. So it is part of the job of the diplomat. But what I should like to say is that MEA could have handled it better, in the sense that obviously MEA doesn't control what the BJP spokesperson say or do not say. But I'm told that Nupur Sharma spoke first, and the West Asian governments were watching, and then the other guy spoke after some gap. I have to double check on this, but this is what a West Asian embassy telling me. In other words, they were prepared to let go of Nupur Sharma's words, but when the other guy also spoke, well, naturally they got upset. Now, instead of getting summoned by the Foreign Office, our ambassador should have been instructed to go and tell our part of the story. That did not happen. That's a pity.
What could be our part of the story? What could be our part of the story in this context?
Our part of the story should have been, we do regret that such statements have been made in India. But India is a self-corrective democracy. Therefore, the government and the society at large are taking action. For example, the party concerned has dismissed them, but action is underway. It is self-corrective democracy, and we do regret. So that is one part of it. Second part is that, in our response, our ambassadors use the phrase fringe elements. Now, this is a standard MHA phrase, which I used to get when I was in service. This is utter nonsense, because when you say that the ruling party spokespersons are fringe elements, well, you are not carrying much conviction. And let me tell you, Barka, an ambassador's most important asset is credibility. Without credibility, the ambassador, well, has no locus standi.
So you're basically saying that the foreign ministry should have been more proactive, should have actually interceded, not after the summons but before. And Ambassador Fabian, you feel that the use of the phrase fringe elements is something that undermines the credibility, because after all, how can the national spokesperson of the ruling party be defined as a fringe element? Excellent arguments there. Let me take them straight away to Sandeep Ghosh, who seems to feel a certain degree, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, from Twitter, a certain degree of, I don't know, sympathy for Nupur Sharma, whom you say will bounce back. Why did you say that? And what do you say to Ambassador Fabian's comments that this describing her as a fringe element is a bit rich? And it's, when I say a bit rich, it undermines the credibility of that attempt to manage the situation. Sandeep?
See, Barkha, it's two parts to it. One, I don't agree with the fringe element bit of it at all. But where I come from is, the whole, like you commented in one of your tweets about the hate factories, etc. And I saw Hamid Mir also commenting on your tweet. It's really become that's the kind of atmosphere which has come into the TV studios or in public discourse. So in that level today, a lot of these people don't have either the training or the maturity, and where they get carried away. I'm not justifying their thing. I think the fault lies with the organization in what is the brief they're giving to their official spokespersons. What is the boundaries they are setting for them? What are the guidelines? I think those things are missing. So she is, I consider her to be bright and fairly, I think she is committed. Now, in these sort of situations, she may have got carried away. All that I've said is this is a learning phase. And she will, at certain point in time, we all make mistakes in our career. You have made mistakes, I have made mistakes. And then people move on. So it's not a question of justifying or sympathizing with her. But the larger issue, I think, Barkha, you'll remember how this, since you have been in television for a long time, if you look at 3 generations of spokespersons, how things have changed. Would you have expected, say, once upon a time, Arun Jaitley used to be a BJP
I mean,
spokesperson?
Arun Jaitley or Sushma Swaraj would never have, or Pramod Mahajan would never have used this language. That's the fact.
None of them would have, and forget this language, the kind of, tutu meme and the kind of things happen in not just of one party. It is no longer confined to one party. All parties and the people who are there, and as you have said, maybe to some extent they're prodded and encouraged by the channels to get into that kind of a slanging match. And so that is what's happening out there. So all that I have said is, again, that therefore BJP had to make an example out of her because of whatever diplomatic or political compulsions. But hopefully, there are people you and I again know who are far more rabid, who are far more offensive, obnoxious, whatever term you want to use on television or in public. Now, she had to be. They made an example out of her. To that extent, I felt,
But may I just interject here to say, I was thinking today, of course, that people can change their rhetoric. I was remembering Varun Gandhi, who made very vituperative anti-Muslim speeches and then has changed his rhetoric today. So, of course, politicians come in many shades and colors at different stages in their life. But here's the irony. Nupur Sharma, described as a fringe element in official speak, is actually going on record to claim that the entire government machinery is behind her and doing no service either to herself or to the party that she represents. And this is, of course, an interview that she gives to a friendly platform called Op India. But I want our guests to listen in before I come to Fazlur Rahman and Commodore Uday Bhaskar. Do listen in.
And I can tell you, after Raza Academy, infamous for their Azad Milan riots and for desecrating, destroying the Amar Jawan Jyoti, those rather culprits and doers can go ahead and file an FIR against me. Devendra Fadnavis ji called to say, don't worry, beta, we are with you. We are all here with you. So the senior leadership, be it the Prime Minister's office, the Honorable Home Minister's office, be it the party president's office, they're all rallying behind me.
So this is the point, Sandeep. She's saying the Prime Minister's office, the Home Minister's office, Devinder Fadnavis, they're all rallying behind me as the government of India is calling her a fringe element. Your response and Ambassador Fabian's quick response, and then I'll open it up. Sandeep.
Point is, therefore, the government thing, let's keep it separate. As Ambassador Fabian said, there can be a lot of questions asked about their handling. I think obviously they got into a sticky spot, and it may or may not have been the best way of how they reacted. There can be definitely questions raised on that. Again, what she was saying, I think that I would not attach too much weight to her saying how much everybody is supporting her and the rest of it. But we have to move on from there and see how not just forward government handles not just this incident, as in terms of the overall rhetoric and the kind of dog whistling or anything you might call it. What's the kind of messaging that goes through from the top echelons of BJP? That would be, I think, we need to watch.
Okay, Ambassador Fabian, briefly before I come to Commodore Bhaskar, your objection to the phrase fringe element is mostly because it doesn't ring true, right? It sounds false.
Correct. And if I may, I want to make another point. We have to ask ourselves, why did Nupur Sharma say what she said? That is primarily because, I repeat, primarily because there is an ongoing project to take India away from secularism and to create a Hindu Rashtra. And she thought that as part of the project team, she has to say all those things.
And I would be very interested in knowing whether this is a permanent red line that has now been drawn by the Modi government, because it's quite clear that hate has both diplomatic and economic consequences. Our vice president had to cancel a scheduled press conference. He's on tour in the Gulf countries, in Qatar. Let me bring you in now at this point, Commodore Bhaskar and then Fazlur Rahman. Commodore Bhaskar, go ahead.
Well, I would make the following observation, Barkha, that what has happened is totally undesirable. And I would characterize this as a major setback for India in terms of its relationship, in the first instance, with the Gulf countries, who, beginning with Qatar and Kuwait and the other two countries, have now, in a way, I think, they have drawn a red line as far as public discourse in India is concerned. And I repeat, this is undesirable. It ought not to have happened. And there is also a major credibility issue, as Ambassador Fabian has rightly pointed out. In terms of whether there will be any red lines internally, I'm a bit skeptical, because I think this did not happen overnight. And again, I go back to the point made by Ambassador Fabian, which is what encouraged Ms. Sharma, and she's not the first one. There have been many other representatives of this particular right-wing Hindutva kind of orientation who have made very objectionable statements over the last year plus, I would say Modi 2.0 onwards, and again after the UP elections and whatever we have seen in the domestic calculus of UP. So if that was the driver, and we have already seen, I would say, fairly intense pushback by the more extreme elements within the Hindutva fold, who believe that Nupur Sharma has been wrong and that the BJP should not have caved in. We have seen a number of such statements, both on social media and elsewhere. So my basic point is that if the domestic political calculus was the driver, and Nupur Sharma is not an isolated incident, on social media, I think you have drawn attention in recent months. We now have songs that are becoming trending on social media, where again, they are advancing this hate agenda against the Muslim community in India. Now, these obviously are not going to go unnoticed. So I think the BJP and the Prime Minister himself, Mr. Modi, would have to do a very, very deep review about whether the Indian response is going to be tactical, which is to placate and tell the Gulf countries that, listen, this will not happen again. Or will they really sort of do an introspection in whichever forum? We, after all, had the RSS chief make certain observations, Mr. Mohan Bhagwat. So I think there has to be some kind of a domestic, at the level of the BJP and the RSS, introspection about what kind of a discourse they are going to encourage in India. And this is not just about perception management. I
Yeah.
think we have to all, as Indians, ask this question, that what to me is a matter of great sadness is that it took the official statement from the Qatar government, they're calling the Indian ambassador, for the Indian establishment to respond.
I
I
was
mean,
just going to
clearly
say
what was
that.
being said by Ms. Sharma was completely unacceptable.
I
But
was
not
just
a
going to
single
say
person,
that.
I repeat this, Barkha, on your show, not a single minister, none of the, I would say, usual suspects who come up on television, social media to support this government and whatever it says, actually said that this should not have been done. It
Yeah,
took Qatar to nudge India. That's my
I was
point.
just I was just going to say that without this diplomatic kerfuffle, the summoning of our envoys, let's remember that this statement was made a number of days ago, and the backtracking, the disowning of this language has only happened after there has been a foreign backlash. So if there's a backlash from Indian citizens, that has not spurred change, and that is, I think, the real tragedy here. Let me bring in Mr. Fazlur Rahman. As an Islamic scholar today, obviously, there are many different dimensions of the debate. In the past, what you can or can't say about the Prophet has come up in debates around literature, has come up in debates around cartoons, but this was none of that. This was a clear sort of brazen communalism of the kind, as Sandeep mentioned, that our TV channels now seem to feast off. Do you believe that this forcing of a red line by the Gulf nations will lead to a change in the domestic discourse?
Yeah, thanks, Baka. First of all, I think let me correct you. My name is Faizur Rahman, not Fazlur Rahman.
I'm so sorry.
Perhaps you
I'm so
got it
sorry.
wrong there.
My
Yeah.
deepest apologies. I'm so
No,
sorry.
not at all.
Mr.
Not
Rahman.
at all.
Yeah.
And see, yes, even from an Islamic point of view, and before I come to the Islamic point of view, I would like to disagree with the panelist who has tried to play down the horrific remarks of Nupur Sharma against my prophet. I mean, he calls it a mistake. Certainly not a mistake. How can that be a mistake? Prophet Muhammad is not just revered by the Muslims, he is also revered by all people, actually. Mahatma Gandhi had a very high opinion about him. Sarojini Naidu had a very high opinion about him. Swami Vivekananda called him the prophet of equality, the prophet of the brotherhood of man. These were the words, I'm quoting, these were the words used by Swami Vivekananda for the prophet. And in such a situation, to play down such horrific remarks against the prophet, which were not made from an academic point of view, they were made from the point of view of a heated debate on the Ganwapi Mosque. And in the context of the issue also, no Muslim had offended any Hindus. No Muslim had offended her Mahadev, as she claims, Nupur Sharma. Nobody had offended. This was unprovoked. In fact, more than Muslims, it is non-Muslims who are questioning the discovery, so-called, of a Shivling. Of course, we respect Hindu religious symbols, certainly. No Muslim has offended them. No Muslim has tried to degrade them. It is non-Muslims who are saying that it could be, and the court has not come to a final conclusion that it was a Shivling after all. So therefore, when there is doubt, to say that people are questioning the Shivling is more than Muslims, it's non-Muslims who are questioning that. So there was no reason for Nupur Sharma to lash out against the Prophet of Islam, who's considered to be the most peaceful person ever to have walked there according to the Muslims. And she goes on to say something of which she has no knowledge. She's not a scholar of Islam to talk about from an academic point of view. And this, as you rightly pointed out, this was not an academic debate. It was a heated debate on some other issue. So therefore, it can't be acceptable. In that sense, the government of India, of course, has come out and said that they are fringe elements, and therefore, they don't enjoy any credibility. It's fine. I welcome that clarification from the government of India. Of course, it's a good clarification. These people have to be shown the place. But before that, the government of India is actually responsible more to the people of India than to foreign nations. It is the people of India who would be affected by such comments. It is the name of India which is going to be affected across the world by such comments. And
Yeah.
before that, the people of India are going to be affected here particularly the Muslims. And like Ambassador pointed out, Ambassador Fabian, it has to be seen in the context of the ongoing Islamophobic atmosphere in India. There's an ongoing Islamophobic project, as you
And I
call
think
it.
you make the good point, Fazur Rahman,
Faizur
that
Rahman.
Faizur Rahman. I really don't seem to be getting this
Yeah.
right today. My apologies, Faizur
Not
Rahman.
at all.
You
Yeah.
make the good point that the government should have come up with describing the government, the BJP veterans. Sandeep could have described Nupur Sharma as a fringe element or vested interest, or at least put distance between her comments and the government's view of the Prophet well before foreign nations got into the act. And that didn't happen now creates an impression that India's been arm twisted into actually saying something that the government didn't think was necessary to say to its own people, as Faizur Rahman just said. Can you respond to that, Sandeep?
See, first thing, I am not downplaying what Nupur Sharma has said. Now, unfortunately, today, Professor Rahman, people, the general, the ordinary people, their knowledge on these things have extremely limited and shallow. Like how many of us, I'm a Hindu, I'm a follower of Vivekananda. I have not read Vivekananda's, statement on the Prophet. Now, that's my failing, but that is the general, today's common denominator if you were to see in people. So that's why I said right now that these are not people who are very competent to even get into this kind of discussion. And the fact that they're treading into it tomorrow, there is a discussion, you say academic or even otherwise with you to discuss Islam. I'm not going to get into that debate because I have, no knowledge about it. So that is where I'm saying there is some immaturity or otherwise. Now, as far as the government is concerned, Barkha, I don't think a government anticipated this kind of a pushback. They were trying to play it with the same, script at which some of the earlier actual fringe elements have been handled. Partly you, brazen it out, or you just let it die and go over, and maybe she would have been privately reprimanded or whatever, and go along. Now, this has come as an unexpected pushback, and to which they have therefore, a bit of a
Yeah.
knee-jerk reaction
Let
over
me
there.
let me bring in Commodore Bhaskar and then Faizur Rahman again, and then I'll come back to the ambassador. Commodore Bhaskar, yes, I think we all agree because it's evident that this disowning or distancing would not have happened had there not been the kind of pushback or mobilization that there has been. Let's also remind everybody that there is many things riding here. There is economics, there's billions of dollars of trade with these nations. There is strategic interest. Qatar is where sort of the Taliban housed itself, where the back channeling between India and the Taliban took place, as revealed by a Qatar government spokesperson earlier. So there are many things at stake here. Do you believe that the government may now finally understand that this hate rhetoric has grave consequences for its own credibility, or might they continue to brazen this out? Like, how do you see this unfolding next?
Well, my reading is a bit bleak. I think at the moment there seems to be a sense of what I would call as misplaced certitude in the government that there is a certain profile and image of India, and that there is a certain orientation that the country is taking under Mr. Modi, where such transgressions and excesses are being interpreted as a case of correcting certain mistakes of history. And therefore, there could be a tactical attempt to try and placate the Gulf nations in the first instance. But apart from all these strands that you mentioned, Barkha, I was very anguished and saddened when I saw on social media within the first 12 hours of the Qatar government's response, where there was a post on social media by a Saudi Arabian person, if I've got that right, where he said that I have a carpenter from India who is working with me, and I shall tell him not to come from work from tomorrow because he is from the same religion as Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India. So you can see across the board that there is already what I would call as a negative consequence for the average Indian citizen, as also for all the interests that you have mentioned. And I'm sure that if the Vice President of India, Mr. Naidu, was going on a visit, after all, we have some very wise people in the government of India now who are steering the ship of state, and they are familiar with the sentiment in the Islamic country.
Yeah.
And there was perhaps, again, I use this word, a misplaced kind of assessment and certitude that we can ride this, and that the domestic development in India and the kind of hate speeches and the entire orientation, which I think Ambassador Fabian spoke about in his first intervention, about the attempt to realize the Hindu Rashtra, is something which is the long-term strategic objective. So if the government thinks they can get away with, managing the Gulf crisis, I think the domestic calculations of UP and the other factors would become dominant, and that I think would be very unfortunate.
Yes, I think you might be right in your reading. But before I come back to Ambassador and to Faizur Rahman, there are people who support this government who can see what is happening because of this. And I saw Anshuman Mishra, for example, tweet me directly talking about the interconnectedness of the world, about the free trade agreements that have been in negotiations with several countries of the Gulf, and also going on to talk about India's captains of industry, Reliance, Tata, Birla, Bharti, all of whom have business links, not to mention, Commodore, as you just mentioned, the millions of Hindus that actually live and work in this country, and you do not want a kind of reciprocal kind of tit for tat in terms of phobia and discrimination driven by religion. Before I come to the ambassador on what the MEA could still do that it hasn't done, Faizur Rahman, I'll allow you a brief response there. Please do go ahead.
Yeah, see, as I just said, while I certainly welcome the government's clarification and the dismissal of their own spokesperson as fringe elements, I must say that diplomacy is not just about strategic or economic interest. It's also about ethics. There is something called diplomatic ethics too. See, irrespective of, what interest it affects, a wrong is a wrong. Supposing if a wrong does not affect,
I agree. But I was just, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just making the point that without those interests being hit, I don't think we would have seen the disowning that we've seen.
No, I absolutely, Varka. I'm not trying to disagree with you there. I'm trying to actually agree with you and say that that's the point we must be talking about. Would India remain silent if it had not affected its diplomatic, your strategic or economic interests? No, India is a country which is known for its inclusiveness. We are known for our university, for our unity and diversity. So, we have a directive principles on which the government's, governance is based, right? So, therefore, India should be calling out a wrong as a wrong immediate. A wrong should be called out, irrespective of whether it affects our strategic or economic interest. So, that's what I want to say to our diplomats, that please, don't weigh in your electoral equations or your international diplomatic or other relations with other countries. You are first answerable to the people of India, especially the Muslims at the moment, because we are the affected parties at the moment. In the last few years, India has earned such a bad name for the Islamophobia that is going on here. The US Commission on International Religious Freedom for the past 2-3 years has been asking the US Congress to designate India as a country of particular concern for its egregious violence in India. So, of course,
can I come in on
that? So therefore, India has to also see that its image is being damaged badly across the world.
I'm glad you brought up the example of the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedoms, because I was going to ask Ambassador Fabian that what's very interesting is that at one level there is this great Indian instinctive pride that we don't want to let other countries how to conduct our business. So we saw this highly publicized exchange where I think Minister Jaishankar told off somebody on stage, when that person said we're very concerned about human rights in India. He said, I'm very concerned about human rights in the United States of America. And I think that was spoken as an equal, and Indians applauded him. But the point is, again and again, I think Indians would have been far more appreciative if this had happened without foreign countries telling us what we need to do. But I want to come to what you said. You believe the foreign ministry could have... Sorry, Sandeep.
I want to come in for a minute there.
Yeah.
I think that's where, I think Sheila Bhatt made a very interesting comment. By pushing this issue too far, you are actually working against it, because it's kind of reinforcing the theory about this whole Islamophobia in India. People feel it is being ratcheted up by a certain lobby, certain set of people in a motivated way.
But how can
And
the lobby? How can the lobby lead whatever this lobby is? How can the lobby create foreign governments'
no,
responses?
therefore, no, whether it's a lobby, obviously, if the US is making comments and these people, and yeah, the foreign government reacted after many days. It did not react immediately after the things happened. And the same Kuwait does not, Qatar does not reflect the same standards when dealing with other countries where their things have been said. So these are issues which will now, I am not making those points, but these are the points which will come up. As you see in social media, people are asking what do the Islamic countries have to say to China about what's happening there, or what did they say to France? Did they boycott the French? So those issues will come in. And here, my worry is, if at all, assuming for a moment, without getting into conspiracy theories, people have actually leveraged the Gulf countries to put pressure on India on this matter.
But are the
This
Gulf, do the Gulf countries have no agency that Indians, Indian individuals, Indian political parties, I don't know what your allusion is to, you actually think that people are so powerful that they're able to weigh upon these countries to respond in a certain way, Sandeep?
the lobby, let's say for a moment, if there is some kind of a foreign country which is not making a
I,
headway,
I, I like to answer Ms. Sandeep briefly, Prakash.
Yeah, can we just get an ambassador, because he's been waiting a long
Yeah,
time, and then
sure,
I'll
sure,
come to you,
sure.
Mr. Rahman.
Yeah, sure.
Ambassador Fabian, 2 points there. One, how could the government have handled it differently, the foreign ministry in particular? Two, Sandeep's somewhat cynical point seems to be that the more this change comes in response to external powers, the more there is going to be conspiracy of lobbies, of pressure, of India falling at the altar of foreign powers, and so on. Ambassador, go ahead.
Well, as regards the second point, I want to share with you, I had recently visited Doha for the Doha Forum. And I also had an interaction with the Qatari diplomats, junior ones and senior ones. And I was speaking about the geopolitical situation. But the first question I was asked, Ambassador, what is happening in UP? What is happening to the minorities in India? In other words, my audience, after listening to China, US, and this and that, the first question is about what is happening internally in India. I do not believe, though I could be wrong, that the Qatar government acted as it did because of any pressure by any lobby on them. Now, coming to your second part or first part, what MEA could have done or should have done. I think MEA could have, once this came out, MEA could have, summoned the Islamic ambassadors and explained to them, as what I said earlier, that we regret it has happened, but we are a self-corrective democracy. We are taking action. And at the same time, I wish they had filed some FIRs against the people who made those statements. Have a thought experiment. Suppose somebody from another party, not BJP, had said these things. Perhaps there would have been an FIR. So, that would have helped matters. But having said all that, I do not think that this storm will, sort of subside soon. And of course, Commodore Bhaskar mentioned about, or I don't know, that somebody, worker who is from Prime Minister Modi's own village, I'm going to ask him not to come and all that. Well, that has happened perhaps, but I do not expect a huge backlash against our people. Supported by the government. That is, backlash supported by the governments. I do not expect, though I could again be proved wrong.
Okay, Mr. Rahman, Faizur Rahman, yes.
See, I would disagree with the other panelists saying that, this is not a conspiracy theory. I don't think, that idea gels. Let me quote you from the judgment of the Bombay High Court, the Aurangabad bench of the Bombay High Court in 2020, if I'm not wrong, while quashing the FIR against the Tablighi Jamaat people, in the context of Corona jihad issues, when they were arrested, a lot of people, this is what the Bombay, the bench, the Aurangabad bench of the Bombay High Court said, and I'm quoting you from the judgment. It says the arrest of these people, this action of arresting them without any evidence, says that, I'm quoting now, indirectly gave warning to Indian Muslims that action in any form and for anything can be taken against Muslims. It was indicated that even for keeping contact with Muslims of other countries, action will be taken against them. This is the Bombay High Court speaking. Okay, and the other part is the fact that the huge conference in Haridwar called for the killing of a huge number of Muslims. So is there also a conspiracy? Was it not real?
So let me
just half a minute, Barkawa. And yesterday, if I'm not wrong, was it yesterday or today? Because I saw the video only today. There's this lady called Devjani Bhattacharya. She was speaking to in the NDTV television channel, and she justified Nupur Sharma's comments, saying that Nupur Sharma spoke the truth, but the unpleasant truth. I mean, the word she used was from a Sanskrit. She quoted a Sanskrit sloka from the Manusmriti, and the sloka was Satyam Bruyat, Priyam Bruyat, Na Bruyat Satyam Apriyam, meaning speak the truth, but speak the pleasant truth. Do not speak the unpleasant truth. So the mistake that this BJP member was telling the television channel yesterday was the only mistake Nupur Sharma committed was to speak the unpleasant truth, which she should not have done. So it is a clear justification.
Can I come in now? If you look at social media, Sandeep, once again, Sandeep, I'm coming to you only with a question. If you look at social media, there's this kind of course. The hard base of the BJP is actually angry that she's been suspended. There is an organized hashtag calling for the boycott of Qatar Airways with boycott misspelled. So there's funny things that also happen in in the online space. But Sandeep, really, for you to suggest that there could actually be a concerted campaign, that there are individuals or I don't even know parties or business houses so powerful that they can get multiple nations to issue the same response, isn't that far-fetched?
At the same time, Barkha, it's happened almost simultaneously.
So what does that tell you? What does it suggest?
OIC, and none of them had reacted earlier. So this does seem orchestrated. For a moment, I'm not either justifying Professor Rahman, either Nupur Sharma's statement or what was said in Hardwar, and I don't want to comment about the Bombay High Court judgment. That will be talking about the judiciary, so I don't want to get in there at all. So none of the two issues are I'm not conflating, but that's I said as it might strike some people, or somebody may piece together that theory tomorrow to tell people that, see, this was done.
And none of it would have happened. And Sandeep, none of it would have happened had the government itself or the BJP itself have disowned these remarks. That I can tell you, most Indians would have told Qatar, Kuwait, Iran, everybody to buzz off. Had we domestically done what was needed to be done, I think we would have all been united in telling external powers not to interfere in our domestic matters.
I said that, Barkha, that it was whether you call error in judgment, miscalculation, or as Commodore Uday Bhaskar was saying, is a misplaced certitude that, anything happens internally, we can just brazen it out. So this has come totally unexpected. Now, how it has come, what's happened, my worry is today, if indeed for a moment you give 1% chance that this was mobilized, for tomorrow any other issue can get mobilized, because there are, at the end of the day, there are people who are unhappy about the progress India and the Gulf countries, Islamic countries have made in this particular regime, despite all the canard and everything about Islamophobia in India. Modi did, when Modi took over, people didn't expect that he would even visit these countries.
I mean, Saudi Arabia allowed India a direct transit to Israel. I don't think it gets more intriguing than that. But now Saudis have joined the chorus of protests. Commander Bhaskar, let's give you the last word. There will be, of course, now a narrative that why should we listen to external powers? And my answer to it repeatedly will be, had we handled this domestically, I think all of us don't like the idea of another country telling our country what we should be. The point is that the action came only after the external powers, in this case the Gulf countries, the West Asian countries, objected. Commodore?
Barkha, my
Yeah.
final thoughts are as follows. I think in the course of our discussion, somewhere there was a suggestion that NEA, the foreign ministry, could have done better. I think that may be a bit unfair because I think the Indian Foreign Office has been doing a great job, I think, in projecting India's point of view in different fora. And I think this has to be something that we need to remind ourselves that the NEA and our ambassadors can only reflect the reality that is India. And the reality within India, I'm afraid, is not very flattering. And my sadness as an analyst is that it took a prod from Qatar, followed by the other countries, to bring us to this point where we are introspecting. And my plea on your platform is that I hope what the BJP does, what the RSS does, what the PMO does, what Prime Minister Modi does, will be strategic with the appropriate integrity, and that it will not be driven by the domestic electoral compulsion and the self-serving arguments that we have seen over the last few years, which I think has brought us to a situation where a Miss Nupur Sharma could say what she did, even as she was being encouraged by the anchor of the day. I think that is the ecosystem that we need to address. And if we don't and continue in this ostrich act, I think India at 75 is not going to be a very, shall we say, positive kind of celebration. Barkha?
Yeah. Ambassador Fabian used a phrase in this program multiple times, self-correcting democracy. I think this is the moment for us to show that we are a self-correcting democracy, but that's not going to happen without more than a nudge from the very top of government. And that is what we actually need right now, not in response to Qatar, Kuwait, Iran, Pakistan, or Saudi Arabia, but in response to what our own citizens, the disquiet we feel at the fact that these are the conversations that today define our public discourse and our primetime television. Thank you very much to our guests. I think, as was said, this is not an issue that's going away anytime soon, and we'll continue to keep a close eye on it. Thank you. Have a great evening. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.